Okay, everybody, welcome back to the main stage here at the Boston Marathon Expo. We hope you're having a great race week so far. We are joined now by the medical coordinator of the Boston Marathon, Mr. Chris Troyanos. Chris, how are you doing?
Good morning, TK. It's great to see you. Great to be in front of the running audience.
Great to have you, Chris. So many years, there are so many runners that you've taken care of and have cared for over the years when they have not been in their finest moment, perhaps. And this year, we want to provide as much care as we can, though everyone's on their own, right?
Yeah, the whole virtual piece of what we're dealing with this pandemic, it's a bit of a pivot for all of us that we have to deal with, but we want to make sure that, as we've done with all of our Boston Marathon events, that our athletes are safe and that they're being well cared for. So as we look at the virtual piece, we want to be able to address some concerns and maybe some new ideas that we can suggest to the running audience.
Along the Boston Marathon course, I think there's 26 different first aid stations, with a station also at the start and 2 enormous medical tents in the finish area. This year, folks will be running the same distance, but with no medical tents along the race course. That said, runners can also, they're choosing the day and the time upon which they want to run. And I know from your standpoint, the biggest variable we always have to deal with every year is the weather.
Well, I think, some good news here is that, all of the runners that are watching this are prepared. They're preparing for the event. And you look at what they would normally be doing for a regular year for the Boston Marathon, they do 7 to 8 months of training on their own. So really not a lot of difference, but, now we have an opportunity to maybe address some situations as it relates to hydration. If they do run into a problem, what do they do? I think we've talked about this earlier, that we're going to change some norms of what we've been doing in the past. So we'll get into a couple of those, but again, we have to keep an open mind in regards to some of these suggestions.
This is the first time the Boston Marathon has ever been run in summer, what is summer here in North America. So I would imagine one of the most pressing conditions facing folks everywhere will be heat, some humidity, some sun, and these are things we deal with in April as well from year to year. But it's just much more of a prevalent thing in mid-September.
It is, but let's go back to what, again, our normal year is, that when runners are preparing for Boston, we know that they're mostly preparing, at least the local runners, in cooler, cold, if not frigid weather. So that we get to that 4th Monday in April, we never know what we're going to get for weather. When we get that rogue, warm, hot day, people aren't acclimatized to it. Well, the good news is that if you're training now for a September virtual, you're going to be a little bit more acclimatized. You're running in warm weather, so that's a positive there. So weather's still going to be an issue, but you've got to watch the heat and humidity on the day that you choose to run, and with that, be able to adjust your output. So if it's going to be a really hot day like it was the last couple of weeks, maybe not the best day to do it, but if you're going to do it, you've got to know you've got to slow down, which has been a constant message that we send in a year that we're anticipating warm weather in April.
We think about personal responsibility and people setting up their own start time, their own start line. Runners have gotten good at listening to their bodies, but this is a day on which folks may try to push through things. This is their marathon, a day they may expand what they might be capable of. When it comes to listening to your body, are there particular warning signs that folks should listen to as they're running along?
Sure. As it relates to the heat, TK, I mean, some things that are concerning that we see all the time when it involves heat illness, whether it be heat exhaustion and the more severe heat stroke, is that you start off feeling maybe a little bit lightheaded, dizzy, potentially nauseous. Your vision can change a little bit. You're just not right. That's when you know you've got to slow down and or stop. I mean, those are the keys. So I think that for our virtual athletes here, we've always recommended this in our normal events, is we ask people not to run with their cell phone. So that's something that I would recommend every runner do is you got to run with a communication device. That's vital. And that may be the way moving forward for every event that's going to happen as we talk about, and we're looking at contact tracing and how that can be effective during this pandemic. But again, having that device with you and probably running with a buddy, running with a support system or pack, I think is absolutely vital. The time of day, important, how you do it. Again, I love the fact of running with someone. Obviously, that's going to help with the weather and the heat, but it also will help our runners with security. I always get concerned with, particularly our female population, about running on their own, particularly whether it be early morning, late at night. That security safety concern has to be paramount. And, again, I know we're talking about weather and heat, but it's a wide range of considerations that need to come into play here.
Where they choose to do their run, the time of day. Of course, there's all sorts of personal safety measures and precautions. Running with a friend, however, is probably as good as it gets. Some folks may be going on a loop. That's probably what I think we'd recommend to most runners, is so that they can see some support folks or a refueling station or a restroom, something like that. And in doing so, they can manage a very predictable topography as well. Not so much the uphills and the downhills, but from a biomechanics standpoint, you guys see people all along the marathon course. Is it mostly like, from a biomechanics standpoint, is it like after the downhills where people have issues, or on the uphills? Where are folks like running into issues on as it relates to topography?
Well, again, not being a runner as you are, but I've treated runners for the past 45 years and listened to so many of you talk about the specific marathon course and what it's like. I've used this term a lot, and it's a golf term. It's a sucker's pin. It means that it's a type of a course or a golf course that makes you want to shoot the ball in a certain area, that the risk reward is very high. The Boston Marathon, in my opinion, does the same thing, at least the regular course. It sets you up for failure because you've got these downhills for about 15 to 17 miles. So the types of stresses on the body are a wee bit different until you take that right-hand turn to go on Calm Ave and hit the hills. And again, how those two different loads impact particularly your legs, cardiovascular system, your overall health, makes a difference. And we've always talked about, when you're training, get on those hills. Work not only the uphills, but the downhills, so you're prepared for it. So it's knowing your course is really what you're getting at. Whether I don't think you'd be running the Boston Marathon course, but whatever course you choose, understand what that's going to do to you. And if you've practiced on it, much like you would for Boston, you're going to set yourself up for success.
When you think of along the course treatments that you typically have to dole out, I imagine it's a lot of Band-Aids, a lot of like Vaseline, stuff like that. What are some things that runners, and these are unexpected things. I mean, runners start the race not thinking they're going to need a Band-Aid at mile 7, but there you are. What are some of these things that runners should just have maybe in the back of their mind or on their loop course, where if they need it, they can grab it?
Oh, I mean, it depends on the support systems around them. But I mean, if they can run with a little fanny pack with the, Band-Aid and some Vaseline or whatever. But again, it goes back to their preparation. Are they training? Are they using the same shoes? Are they, we talk about that all the time, about not trying to break in a new pair of shoes either the week before or even, believe it or not, the day of, your race, your big race. You don't want to change your norms in regards to what you're wearing, what you're eating, drinking, all of that. And if you could stay with your practice norms, then your event, your virtual event, is going to be that much better.
The old adage in terms of hydration is, if you are already thirsty, when you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. I'm assuming that's true. Are there hydration best practices or formulas, or mathematically speaking, is there a best practice that folks should? I mean, you don't want to drink too much, and you want to have enough where, you know, you might feel a little thirsty, but you can replenish yourself when needed. What's sort of a good path for runners to follow?
Well, that's, as you know, it's a very difficult question to answer.
Sorry,
So,
sorry.
but
It's marathon week. It's all about doing hard stuff. So I asked you a hard question.
when I use the term fluid prescription. So hydration needs or fluid prescriptions of every one of us is different. Is not, it's different for everyone in their race. So you've got to really kind of play around with understanding what that is. So one of the things we've talked about for years is obviously not over drinking, and that means not over drinking pre, during, post. But to understand your needs, and your needs are going to change based on the amount of exertion you're putting into this, the weather, the type of course, all of that. So one of the things we talk about is, all right, you're going to go for a run. Go out and weigh yourself. Let's just use your 100 pounds as an average here. So you weigh yourself, you're 100 pounds before you run. You go out and do a run. Say you do a 7-10 mile, but you don't drink anything. Or you do drink some things and you come back and you weigh yourself. And let's just say you're 99 pounds now. Well, you know you're a little dehydrated because you lost a pound. And the formula that I use is you think of a pint of water as a pound. So you're down a pint of water. That's what you need to rehydrate to get back to normal stasis. If you went out and ran and drank and you came back and you were 102 pounds, you overhydrate. But again, it's variable depending on your exertion levels and the weather. So you've got to know that it's not going to be the same every time you go out. And I don't know if a lot of people would agree with me, but I've always felt that, and it's not particularly Boston, but a lot of events tend to overhydrate our runners. There's a lot of opportunities for you to drink. And maybe sometimes our runners are drinking too much. You know, we've always talked about the concern of hyponatremia. And obviously there have been some fatalities with hyponatremia, which is drinking too much and low body sodiums at road races. Well, that doesn't happen when you're training. It only happens during the event. So if we think about this, when you're doing your virtuals, you might need to bring some water, carry it with you, or know there are certain stops, but you don't need to overhydrate. You're not going to have a fatality from dehydration. Never going to happen.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's just that you be dehydrated and it's going to affect your performance, but it's not going to cause a fatality, as over drinking could.
Okay.
So that's a very big distinction.
I've been dehydrated and I've been lightheaded, and sometimes people even faint from being too dehydrated. One of the warning signs there must be like vision, or do you get a little loopy? How should a runner know if they're getting dehydrated?
I mean, all of that. You just talked about it. You're a little dizzy, you get a little, even nauseous, and your version can go a little bit off. You know you're thirsty.
Yeah.
But again, it's a matter of planning. But I always get concerned about runners overdoing it.
Yeah.
The problem. I know in Boston, we don't want people with backpacks or camel packs or things like that because of 2013. But there's another situation that as we look at the pandemic and our return, we get back to our activities again. Hydration stations are big contact points, and preventing the spread of a virus. So how do we address that? So is it now saying to our runners, well, now you need to carry your own water with you?
Mm-hmm.
So again, these are some adjustments that we might need to be looking at in the future.
We, along the Boston Marathon course, typically have Gatorade endurance formula, which has a lot of sodium in it and some good sugar value in there, which your body needs. And then there are water stations. Is there a value to doing one or the other or both? I've always just grabbed like some Gatorade is what I've tried to go off of. And then I guess I've grabbed water too. But is it sort of just personal preference, or are 3 ounces of Gatorade as good as 8 ounces of water? You know what I mean?
In a sense, yes. Think about this, and with all due respect to one of our major sponsors and a pretty good company, Gatorade, there's not enough sodium in Gatorade to make a difference. So That's one of the things when we talk about hypernatremia and low sodiums, Gatorade will have no impact on that whatsoever. So whether you drink water or Gatorade, it's what are you, or any type of sport drink, it's again, what are you doing in your preparation, in your training that you're used to? So if you're used to just drinking water, stay with that. If you're doing a combination of water and Gatorade in your training, that's fine, stay with that too. But again, one over the other, I don't see a big advantage.
Are there warning signs for overhydration, hyponatremia? Is it a lightheaded thing with that?
And that's where the rub comes in, is that a lot of the warning signs with overhydration mimic dehydration. So, when runners come into our medical tent and, they're talking about and able to explain some of their symptoms, one of the first things I'm going towards is, all right, how much did you drink? And if I'm getting from that runner that they were hitting all the water stops, drinking a lot, then that's a bell in the back of my head saying we might have a low sodium problem. And our approach is going to be different in that medical tent. One of the key, maybe slight differences is headache. If you overdrink and you're developing a headache, that's a key indicator. Not so much with dehydration.
Is there sodium replenishment? If Gatorade gives you maybe a little bit, but not a volume of sodium that you might need. People take like salt tablets and things like that. Certainly you don't want to try something new on the day of running your race, but there are solutions out there for sodium replenishment, right?
I mean, there are. You talked about salt tablets, maybe a little bit of a salt packet under the tongue, that type of thing. And we sometimes might do that, in our medical tent. So if we suspect that hyponatremic patient that's got a low sodium, which we would obviously confirm with a blood test, which is not available at a lot of different events, but Boston does do that, is that we have what we call hypertonic solutions. So it could be a bouillon or a salty drink, that type of thing that can bring that salt up. It's very important. And that's a standard piece of equipment or supplies that we have in all of our medical stations.
I am not a doctor, but what does sodium do for the blood? Is that?
Think of your, obviously you have an electrical system, from your brain and how your brain is able to coordinate all of your functions, from muscle movement to your heart to your skin. Everything that happens in your body is an electrical system. So for that electrical system to work properly, you need a proper level of sodium, positive and negative ions. So if that is out of balance, that's where you get into trouble.
The majority of the 18 to 20,000 runners who are taking part in the race this week, I would imagine are in the Northern Hemisphere and therefore dealing with summer. I know that we have a lot of folks in the Southern Hemisphere, perhaps dealing with winter, training through winter, like normally happens here in Boston as we gear up for April. So when you're running in cold weather, I know that it becomes a little bit easier from a mass participatory management standpoint because the risks change and maybe the severity of some of the impact is reduced. But for those running in cold weather, you still need to drink a lot of water, right? What are some other tips that you would lend out to folks running in cold weather, down under or in South America or wherever?
I'd rather stay hydrated properly than drink a lot of water, but you're right. You still need to drink. I think also too, you need to start looking at how are you dressing. We talk about layers. Again, Boston, when you look at the history of the years that I've been involved, is traditionally a cold weather event. We've had our rogue days of hot weather and even some very nasty rain events, as you remember in 15. But when you look at, the number of encounters we had medically in 15 during that cold, rainy day, it was just as high as it was in 2012 with the hot day. So the severity were on either side, but how you prepare and deal with it can be a little bit different. So, one of the things we talk about with our runners in cold weather, it seems so strange to be talking about cold weather, but, preparing yourself, running in that weather, type of equipment, and hats and gloves. And again, keeping your extremity, particularly your head, warm is a major way to prepare and prevent any any issues with what we call now hypothermia, so a low body core temperature. And we saw a lot of that in 2015.
One of the things that happens in those cold weather days, whether it's 2018, 2015, 2007, I think these are all like sort of cold, rainy days, is after people finish. I mean, the body temperature drops because the temperature's in the 30s or 40s Fahrenheit. So if folks are running virtually in a cold situation, it's probably very important to finish near a warm location, right?
Well, we always talk about this with Boston, and we should talk about it in virtual too, is that once you finish a couple things, and this is standard regardless of the weather, you finish your marathon, don't stop once you cross that virtual finish line. You have to keep walking. Where runners get into trouble with what they call exercise-associated collapse is where they basically stop. You've been working your butt off for 26.2 miles. Your legs become a major mechanical pump of getting blood up to your heart and your brain. And that is working well for your run, but you say dead stop and decide to sit. Well, what happens? All that blood pools in your legs. So you get lightheaded and or can pass out. So it's very important that no matter how tired you are, keep walking.
You know, obviously running with someone, that is helpful for a number of reasons. But if you are with 2 people or 3 people at the 25.9 and 26.2 mile mark, you will, yes, feel very happy. You, yes, will likely feel elated, but you will also be tired and depleted of certain nutrients, etc. So I think it's going to be pretty important to have a support system of people, not just there at the finish to celebrate with you, but also those who know you to just keep an eye on you, right? Like, see how you're doing.
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, you look at Boston and again, our normal years, you know, we talk about this with the hospitals all the time, is that we have 4 waves of runners. Well, what we talk about the hospitals is what we call a 5th wave. That 5th wave happens later in the day when we finally close our medical tents at 7 or 8 o'clock, that the hospitals start to see an influx of runners that have run the Boston Marathon coming in late because they either overdrank or something went wrong. And they're very aware, all 10 of our supporting hospitals are very aware of this phenomenon. And we train them on it and talk about it. And we've, you know, don't have as much statistics as we want, but it's a concern after the event. So you're absolutely right. Having a support system, having someone watch you, listening to your body after you finish is vital. And then, you know, the one thing I should have mentioned earlier, and again, it goes for after the race as well, you should be having a discussion with your primary care physician, you know, to make sure, I know you know this because you and I worked on this document, is that we send out an email to all of our runners in January suggesting that they have a discussion with their cardiologist and or physician, a primary care physician, about their particular situation. Is this event and the intensity, the distance right for them? So that's I think a must as you look at the virtual still. But if you're having problems afterwards, knowing who your support system is beyond your immediate family from the medical center, so that if you have a doctor or a physical therapist or someone in the know that can help you, it's always good to be able to lean on them.
Obviously, this is not a situation that runners would want to think about, but sort of if there is a need later in the day as they prepare for their race, where might they go for medical attention? And what day might work out for that? Again, not something that runners want to probably plan on or think about, but from a preparation standpoint, it's probably a wise move, is what I'm hearing from you.
I mean, TK, you and I have worked together for years, and you know that, you know, my major goal is preparation and anticipating every possible scenario. We've learned that throughout the years. So it's important, and again, I really appreciate this opportunity. You know, the BAA has always said runner, athlete safety first. And this is exactly what we're doing here. It's just highlighting some things for people to think about. And if we can prepare our virtual runners for a good, solid, safe event and an eventual return in 21, then that's exactly what we've been doing for years.
There are, again, 18, 19, 20,000 people doing it this week, and it is a phenomenal phenomenon of everyone sort of being connected here virtually. But your fifth wave point is just such a good one. Of though I mean, we've all felt it, I guess, after long runs or after races. I mean, yes, there might be a time 2 hours after the race or 3 hours after the race where you still feel a little depleted. I guess from a nutrition standpoint, after you finish a marathon, I've not been able to have an appetite sometimes for a little while after the race. But are there foods that folks might want to? I mean, people may like to indulge or reward themselves with a big dessert or a big cheeseburger or whatever. From your standpoint, are there foods that can help people just replenish themselves after a race?
Well, we've talked, we obviously talked about fluids. I think that's key. I mean, you've got a tremendous buildup of lactic acid in your body, so the fluids and your kidneys are working hard. So that's going to help get some of those lactic acids out of your body. I think replenishing some of your carbohydrates, important. Proteins. Again, I always like the good balanced nutrition approach, no matter when, either pre or post. And again, what you're used to eating. Look, if you want to treat yourself to a burger and fries after doing 26.2 miles, go right ahead. I'd be right there with you. But again, it's what you're used to doing, and again, important that it's what you think your body needs.
How long after the race might people come down with something or feel like, is your immune system weakened after running the race, or is it mostly just like should people still be paying attention to themselves the next day, the 2 days after?
I would almost say a week to 10 days after. You've got to, again, be in tune with your body and understand how it's feeling. We've talked about heat, cold, hydration, nutrition. We also have to keep in mind, this is a strenuous exercise in the sense that what happens orthopedically to your bones and joints. So that if you are getting, say, foot or shin pain, either during or after, particularly the event, and that pain's not going away, that's the time to call your orthopedic consult and have that looked at. Because again, this is a very stressful athletic endeavor for your body. So yeah, we talked about heat and cold and the head and all that, but your bones and muscles are taking a lot of pounding, as you know, during an event like this.
Because runners have the flexibility this week to choose the day and the time, that gives them great ability to be their best advocate for health. I mean, in terms of not running at noon or not running through a storm that might be running through town. Sometimes, because it's a long endeavor, 4 hours, 5 hours in some cases, weather can roll in. Storms can show up, as we know from many years of putting on this event. If a storm rolls in on a runner and he or she is by him or herself, or there's just a small group, are there tips or guidance, mental or physical tips that you would want to share?
Yeah, I think that, and again, we saw this in what was it, 2018, our last marathon, where we had thunder and lightning up and down the course. That was a first for all of us. And we were able to communicate and prepare people and get them in safety situations, runners and particularly our volunteers, rather quickly. But again, as you look at your run and your planned run, our forecast and your ability to forecast are very good. So you've got to look at that forecast, and if you're going to have a 5 or 6 hour window, know what that weather's going to look like. So that, if you're going to run, preferably, I would suggest you run where you have low humidity. You have a low heat index. That's important, whether it be in the morning, late afternoon, early evening. Those are ways that heat's going to be less. Running middle of the day, not a good idea, in my opinion. Then as it comes to electrical storms and rain, you've got to know, again, your course. And again, we talked about having your phone with you. Well, your phone should have a weather app. And a lot of these apps can give you warnings if something's rolling in. Have a plan put together about, all right, if it's going to happen at any point in time, what are my shelter locations? What are appropriate shelter locations? So as when we dealt with, the last marathon, We knew that a lot of our buses were safe. Any type of vehicle, with tires, safe. A building with plumbing and electricity, safe.
Hmm.
Under a tree or under a structure that this has a roof with no plumbing or electricity, it's not safe.
Hmm.
So there are certain things that meteorologists will tell you are appropriate for safe locations in electrical storms, and you should go online to really get a good understanding of that. But knowing what is appropriate, what isn't, and where, how quickly, because these storms, as we've seen, can roll on you so quickly,
Hmm.
you have little time to react.
Yeah. And in some cases, they can come from behind you, right? Like you're looking one way, and why cars? Why are cars okay in electrical storms?
They're grounded, in the sense with the tires. So that's why if I had an electrical storm and I was outside, I'd just get in my car.
Okay. And houses with plumbing that goes into the earth in a similar way is grounded, correct?
Exactly. Yep.
But a bus shelter that is connected to the ground may not be.
So anything with tires, I mean, look, a bus or a car can get hit by lightning, but for the most part, it's going to go through and into the ground.
Yeah.
So again, it's a safer location.
Normally we would talk about the chances of lightning striking being very remote. It's 2020, it's a crazy year, and we've got people geographically all over the world, and lightning, it happens everywhere and all the time. So I think it's a little bit more of a prudent conversation to be having this year. And again, with 8 days to take on your race, pay attention to the weather. Chris, from a predictive standpoint, is high humidity related at all to electrical events?
It can be, sure. I mean, high heat, high humidity, and we've seen this, obviously, if you live in Florida or the southeast part of the United States, you see this in the afternoon all the time. The heat and humidity build up, and 3 or 4 o'clock, it's like clockwork that you get these pop-up thunderstorms. We don't see that here as often, but we've seen it a few times this summer where late afternoon thunderstorms will roll in. And again, it's a byproduct of heat and humidity building and getting into the atmosphere, causing these storms to develop.
The 2019 marathon last year, there was lightning in the morning, and then it went away right before the start of the race. That must have caused a little bit of stress on your end, I'm imagining.
Yep.
And then in 18, of course, it was this long day of just horrendous cold, wind, etc. Were people sheltered in 18 and 19, or were like runners along the course almost sheltered? I can't remember.
Well, in 18, yeah, we as you know, we created a lot of shelter opportunities. We have multiple shelters that are identified along the route that can hold thousands of people, and we're able to coordinate that very quickly with our cities and towns and our public safety folks. With the lightning, the one thing that was a big help was the timing. Is that took place, as you know, it started out west of Hopkinton, blew through Hopkinton through the village, and actually went pretty much right down the course into Boston. So that we didn't have runners on the course that we had to worry about. It was more volunteers and public safety folks. Our runners were starting to get into buses in Boston. So again, they were in a vehicle. So we were able to send, I think, a third of the group out to Hopkinton, and we were able to put that group into the high school and keep the other was either in Boston, or actually, I believe a third of them were on the Mass Pike waiting in buses until the storm blew through. So we were fortunate because of the timing of it. If it happened at 8:30, 9 o'clock, then that whole shelter program would needed to be activated.
Wow. We've talked with Dave McGilvery this week on the main stage here, and I went through a few different years with him in terms of difficulty or the ability to adapt and the times at which our preparations were most needed. But we've talked about 2007, 2000, cold weather in 07, 15, 18, and then hot weather in like 04, 2012, 14 even. Which one of those takes the cake from a difficulty standpoint? I think, of course, 2013 with a whole separate slew of, unforeseen, I would say, medical issues that sort of came through. I guess 2013 notwithstanding, which of those years was perhaps the most difficult from a management standpoint?
In my career, I talk about this in a lot of my lectures. I talk about, I think it was '04. That I think it was '04, we had a similar day to 12. And I don't believe that we understood the magnitude of what could happen back then. Again, every year we've learned, as you know, so much, and it changed and pivoted to what we've needed to do. But '04, it didn't work as well as I would have liked. I wouldn't say that we were not prepared, but we could have been better.
Mm. And that was high 80s, right?
High 80s, yep. And we just didn't have the same systems in place that we had in 12. Now, 12 was a similar year, just as difficult, but we had adjusted over that course of time to understand what we needed to do and do better. Hmm. So we were much more coordinated. And everything that we learned in those periods of times in regards to heat and what we did in 12 had a major impact on the response in 13. When you think about it, that in '04, we were not connected to the hospitals as well as we are today. So with all those changes, the coordination with the hospitals were part of our overall planning process. Again, once we went through 12, just showed up in the responses in 13. We didn't plan for that bomb to happen. We never talked about it. But we were able to pivot so quickly because we were used to dealing with the heat. That's why we saved so many lives.
Mm. The point that is so, I think, salient to remember is just everybody who went into a medical tent in 2013 came out alive. You guys that was your systems, your good work. Does a day go by when you don't think about that year, that day, or at this point have you sort of moved past it?
I do think I've moved past it until we bring it up like this. I really don't think about it much, but that's
sorry.
Okay. No, don't. I've always said that it was something that we went through and experienced, and I try to look at the positives versus the negatives, and the positives being that the response from public safety and our volunteers across the board, and so many other people that answered the bell when it needed to be answered, was phenomenal. I mean, so many people could have run the other way, and so many more ran towards the blast sites and did what needed to be done. A lot of heroes were born that day, and my hat's off to them. And I'm very proud of our team, and particularly the support the BAA, as you know, have given us, the medical team, for so many years, well before 13. That if we don't have that support financially and the ability for me to do my job, we don't have the success we have in 12, 13, or anywhere beyond, and how we're going to be looking at coming back from this pandemic. This medical team's been faced with a lot of challenges, and this new one's going to be equally as challenging.
One of the things that always amazes me is the mass of preparation and materials that you help coordinate and put together from, the by the numbers thing, right? Like the number of cots, the number of Band-Aids, all these things that you have to coordinate for 26 aid stations along the course. And by the way, that's not one at every mile, right? When people hear 26, the first things to think of, there's one at every mile. Actually, when you get to Newton, you've got them almost every quarter mile, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And so from the preparatory standpoint, there's just an enormous amount of stuff that you've got to pull together for this.
It is, and it's a tremendous challenge. One that I never take for granted, and it's not one of those plug and play every year. It changes. And I think that, again, one of the things you talked about, that by the numbers piece, is one thing that you didn't mention, I'm not sure it's even in there, is that I have a medical team of 1,800 medical professionals.
Whoa.
1,800. That's doctors, nurses, athletic trainers, therapists, EMTs, on and on, students, non-medical people. And the biggest challenge for us every year is that how do I make sure that those 1,800 people do what we want them to do, follow our protocols, our procedures, our operational logistic approaches, know how to communicate. And they do so well. I mean, I talk to them, whether it be virtual or in meetings, and we talk about the team approach and how important it is to work as a team, no egos. And the biggest thing that you need to do is make sure our athletes are well cared for. And they do it so well. And I look back in my career, that's the one thing I am so proud of, is to be able to stand in front of that group with others to help lead it. Tremendous group of people.
You typically have a morning meeting, I think, in one of for at least the finish line team, right, in the back bay somewhere.
Yep, we do it at the Dorothy Quincy Suite. Out of the 1,800, 800 of them are in the Boston area. So large amount of people, and my job that morning is to kind of rally the troops, get them, moving and understanding what's going to happen. A very quick overview, and it's kind of a little bit of a rah-rah meeting, but a good one. And again, we love doing it. I've missed that. I missed that the year we had the thunderstorms. I had to pull out of it to deal with that, and obviously missed it this year. But I love getting in front of that group. When you look at the whole day, that is the one thing that excites me the most, is standing in front of that group. Because one thing I can do is say thank you. That is so important.
What a pregame speech to give. I mean, that sounds like, I mean, you got the whole team. These guys are so important on that day, and to give them that pep talk, I mean, that's cool.
It is. And to be honest with you, the hardest one I ever gave was in 2014.
Oh yeah, it's gotta be. I can only imagine.
So that was emotional, to put it lightly. But it was, again, I needed to set the tone and to show strength and hopefully leadership to how the day was going to go, was important, because it's the anxiety, as you know, and how we felt about coming back to the scene of the crime, so to speak. We didn't know how people were going to react. We didn't know what was going to happen, if it was going to happen again. And the fact that all of those volunteers came back the next year. And as you know, we also turned away probably about 1,500 people that wanted to join the team, to be part of it, to show these idiots, these terrorists, that you're not going to change our way of life.
What a year. In not only all of that, but 9,000 more runners in 2014 as well. So that adds an additional whole series of, that was the first year there was 4 waves, was 2014. It was a 3-wave event of 9,000 runners, and expanded for that 1 year to 36,000, which was almost the largest marathon of all time. And you were involved in you've been doing this for 40 something years. You were also there for the 100th, speaking of large numbers. What was that like, with a noontime start and 1 start?
Yeah, that was really my first marathon as medical coordinator, official medical coordinator. The BA had asked me to undertake that the year before. I was lucky enough to go to New York in '95. And my biggest concern there was density. How do you deal with that size of a group? And what did that mean for medical? What did that mean for the finish line? Did we have, as you know, we have very limited space in Boston to deal with numbers like that. Unlike New York or Chicago, that have much bigger footprints. So, if someone bent over and sneezed on Arlington Street, would that back up what was going on across the finish line before Dartmouth? And we had those issues because of just the number of people. So it was a learning process, one that I'm glad I went through, and it kind of set the stage for me moving forward. But every year, no matter how many years I've done this, I've learned so much.
I can only imagine. And you are sharing, you help races and marathons around the world, right? Create medical plans based on the things you've learned, right?
Yeah, that's a nice adjunct to what I do. And the last trip I made was in Doha for their World Championships and their marathons and race walks. And I was there at the finish line, designing before that the medical program and how they were going to deal with the heat and their overall medical approach. And it was a great opportunity. So it's nice that, Boston, and I think this, has always led, not only from the medical side, but from other ways, how the industry approaches their events. And so many people over the years have come to Boston to learn and to see what we do. And we've gone other places and also learned from them.
Mhm.
So we're always sharing ideas on how to get better.
We are just about out of time, Chris Troyanos. Thanks for joining us. Any last words of wisdom for runners taking on the race this week? I mean, you've given plenty, so if there's nothing more, that's okay. But you must have one last parting shot of good luck or run safe kind of message.
Well, I think it's yes, it's obviously that, but also say thank you. Thank you to all 1,800 that are taking part. Thank you to all of the runners that have ever run Boston and supported the event, our city, our causes. And understand what we're all about. The hopes are that we're going to come back. We will. It's just a matter of when and how. But trust me, I tell you, as we've always done, and when we come back, we will keep you safe. We will do the right thing. And for that, I'm always grateful to be able to lead that charge.
Well, I think I say a lot, speak for a lot of runners when I thank you for all your support in keeping all of us in good hands year after year, and we look forward to your continued support. And thanks for joining us today and sharing some tips, Chris.
TK, it's always great to see you, and good luck with the rest of your efforts.